And there we go. So hello, darlings and hamburgers. Lovely to have you back with me. I missed y'all, and I hope you are well. I apologize for missing last week. As I mentioned, I had my first COVID vaccination and was a little wobbly because of it. Nothing too serious. So, if there's any of you out there, I can't imagine it, but if there's any of you out there trying to decide whether or not you're going to have the vaccine, don't let that discourage you. It's not a big deal. I was also exhausted. It had been a long week. So, anyway, good to see you. Good to be back. And I hope you're all well. Who's here? Let's see. Wouter. Hello. Ilva. Hello, sweetie. I know it was strange not doing it. It felt odd after a year straight or more. Anna, hello. Good to see you. Holger, checking in from Waldesruhe. Good to see you. Svan, hello. Mark, checking in from West Yorkshire. James, hello, James. Hazel, yes, sweetie. Hi, that's my mother-in-law. Yes, my dear, I am feeling fine. And we're all doing well around here, so no worries that way. And good to see you, as always. Iris, or Iris, I suppose. Good to see you, too. Good morning. And who else have we got here? Dirk. Hello, Dirk. Hello, Chris. Good morning. Good morning, Carol. Nice to see you. Mahmoud. Very nice to see you. And who else we got? Felina. Yes, I am feeling better. Thank you. Patrick. Oh, by the way, I just got, this is a message to Felina. I just got a very nice note from your friend, student, daughter, friend, student. I can't remember the exact situation. But anyway, I just got a very nice note from her. So just thought I'd mention that. Patrick. Hello. Good to see you. Jeremy. Hi, Jeremy. Yes, I'm feeling good. I'm doing well. Teresa, or Teresa, to make it sound more German. Good to see you. Christine, lovely to see you too. Rosina, you finally made it? Well, I'm glad you did make it. Nice to see you. Nice to have you all here. And what can I say? Not a whole lot to report around here, except we seem to be on the final leg of the whole vaccination thing. We've got 2 of our 6 human members of the household who have had both of theirs, including our daughter, who was the one we were most concerned about because of her health issues. So she is now in her last week or so of waiting for the lag period after you get your second vaccination. And our family member, Max, who's technically not a biological member of the family, but he lives with us, and we've known him since he was a wee child. And Max has had 2, and then so Deb is going to have her second one around the same time that I'm going to take the other 2 members of the family, our 2 other young members of the family, and take us all off to get my second and their second. So that's about it. I know the vaccine stuff isn't all that interesting, but just because I've been talking about it, I thought I'd mention it. What else to talk about? Nothing really. We're just all kind of, hanging out. I'm working. I'm currently in the midst of the rewrite of Navigator's Children. Okay, I'm going to break a story. Not that anybody cares that much, but I, with great chagrin, or as Deb always says it, as if the original French word chagrin. I'll just say chagrin because I'm a Yank. With great chagrin and a certain amount of embarrassment, I'm pretty sure now that I'm going to have to split Navigator's Children into 2 books for publication. It's still probably going to be less long than To Green Angel Tower. Certainly no longer, he said, having proved already a rather unreliable narrator. But I'm beginning to realize that the way things are these days and the things that publishers are going through and stuff, I don't think we can get another, whatever the heck that hardcover was, 1,200 pages. We probably can't do another 1,200-page hardcover. So it's going to have to be split into two books. what that means is not going to really change anything for when the first part comes out. I don't have any information yet on when we're going to do the second part. I hope it will be like last time, they were like 6 months apart or something like that. I hope that's what we can do this time. But anyway, I just got to the point where, after talking to the publishers and listening to their squeals of horror, I have reluctantly said, okay, if that's how it has to be, that's how it has to be. I am bitterly disappointed, of course, because I had sworn I would bring this in 3 books. And in fact, from what I've seen of it, it isn't any longer than the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy. But in good faith and with my publisher's best interests in mind, we're going to probably wind up splitting it. Have no idea yet. It's still the Navigator's Children, whether it's going to be the Navigator's Children Part 1, whether it's going to be the Navigator's Children Part 1, and then there'll be Part 2, the Navigating or something. I don't know. No, they'll probably both be like just 1 and 2. But anyway, so that has come to me in the last couple of weeks. It does make it easier for what I'm working on at the moment, because I can put aside the second half, which is the one that needs the most writing work, and I can concentrate on the part that's most of the way, the first half is pretty much largely finished. I'm polishing at the moment. So anyway, that's what's going on with that. I am shocked and aghast at having to do this again. On the other hand, I am going to finish the books, which is, that in and of itself is a bit of a novelty in this day and age. So yes, it's going, and that's what I'm working on at the moment. I'm working on the Navigator's Children. I'm working on a proposal for another book, and at some point I'm going to be finally getting back to the Third Ordinary Farm book, and just whatever else is around that has to be worked on. It's my life. It's my life, and I'll do what I want, as Eric Burden and the Animals used to sing way back when. Anyway, okay, so with no further ado, or at least with not too much ado, or at least without not too much ado about nothing, I'm going to go ahead and read. So with that said, and having made my shameful admission, which I cannot tell you how embarrassing I find this. I really can't. I really was convinced that I was going to be able to do this in one single volume. And to be fair, if it had been 1988 again, I would have been able to. But things have changed in the publishing industry, and the idea of a 1,200, 1,300 page hardcover just made my publisher's blood run cold. So that's where we is, and that's where we's at. Anyway. But it's good to be back. It's good to be back. And I am working on fiction when I have a few moments in the midst of my busy schedule of letting dogs in and out of one part of the house to another. Anyway, so we are back to Shadowmarch. I am not going to bother to précis everything that's happened or synopsize. You can go back to previous recordings if you want to find out, but enough to say we're starting out with a character who hasn't made their appearance yet in the story anyway, so you wouldn't have heard anything in the synopsis, and then we're going to be going back to the Eden family, which you have heard something about, and won't really take a whole lot of catching up. Anyway, so Shadowmarch, we continue. Chapter 6, Blood Ties. A hidden place. Walls of straw, walls of hair. Each room can hold 3 breaths. Each breath an hour. From the Bonefall Oracles. She did not make her dwelling in the ancient, labyrinthine city of Kol-Nakwar, although she had long claim to a place of honor there, by her blood and by her deeds. And by deeds of blood as well. Instead, she made her home on a high ridgetop in the mountains called Rehexane, which meant Wanderwind, or something close to it. Her house, although large enough to cover most of the ridge, was a plain thing from most angles, as was the lady herself. Only when the sunlight was in the right quarter, and a watcher's face turned just so, could crystal and sky stone be seen gleaming among the dark wall stones. In one way, at least, her house was like the great Col Naquar. It extended deep into the rocky ridge, with many rooms below the light of day, and a profusion of tunnels extending beyond them, like the roots of an old, old tree. Above the ground, the windows were always shuttered, or seemed that way. Her servants were silent, and she seldom had visitors. Some of the younger choir, who had heard of her madness for privacy, but of course had never seen her, called her Lady Porcupine. Others, who knew her better, could not help shuddering at the accidental truth of the name. They had seen how, in moments of fury, a nimbus of prickly shadow bloomed about her, a shroud of phantom thorns. Her granted name was Yasames, but few knew it. Her true name was known to only 2 or 3 living beings. The lady's high house was called Shehen, which meant weeping. Because it was a Saquar word, it meant other things too. It carried the intimation of an unexpected ending, and a suggestion of the scent of the plant that in the sunlight lands was called myrtle. But, more than anything else, it meant weeping. It was said that Yasames had only laughed twice in all her long life. The first time when, as a child, she first saw a battlefield and smelled the blood and smoke from the fires. The second time had been when she had first been exiled, sent away from Col Naquar for crimes or deeds of arrogance long since forgotten by most of the living. "You cannot hide me, or hide from me," she is said to have told her accusers, "because you cannot find me. I was lost when I first drew breath." Yasames was made for war and death, all agreed, as a sword is made, a thing whose true beauty can only be seen when it brings destruction. It was also said that she would laugh for the third time only when the last mortal died, or when she herself took her final breath. None of the stories said anything about the sound of her laughter, except that it was terrible. Yasames stood in her garden of low, dark plants and tall gray rocks, shaped like the shadows of terrified dreamers, and looked out over her steep lands. The wind was as fierce as ever, wrapping her cloak tightly around her, blowing her hair loose from the bone pins that held it, but was still not strong enough to disperse the mist lurking in the ravines that gouged the hillside below like claw scratches. Still, it blew loudly enough that even if any of her pale servants had been standing beside her, they would not have been able to hear the melody Lady Yasames was singing to herself, nor would they even have believed their mistress might do such a thing. They certainly would not have known the song, which had been old before the mountain on which she stood had risen from the earth. A voice began, excuse me, a voice began to speak in her ear, and the ancient music stopped. She did not turn, because she knew the voice came from no one in the Stark garden or high house. Secretive, angry, and solitary as she was, Yasames still knew this voice almost better than she knew her own. It was the only voice that ever called her by her true name. It called that name again now. "I hear, oh my heart," said Lady Porcupine, speaking without words. "I must know." "It has already begun," the mistress of the ridgetop house replied, but it stabbed her to hear such disquiet in the thoughts of her beloved, her great ruler, the single star in her dark, cold sky. After all, this was the time for wills to become stony, for hearts to grow thorns. All has been put into motion, as you wished, as you commanded. There is no turning back, then? It almost seemed a question, but Yasames knew it could not be. "No turning back," she agreed. So then, in the full raveling of time, we will see what new pages will be written in the book. We shall. She yearned to say more, to ask why this sudden concern that almost seemed like weakness in the one who was not just her ruler, but her teacher as well. But the words did not come. She could not form the question, even in the silence of shared thought. Words had never been friends to Yasamis. In this, they were like almost everything else beneath the moon or sun. Farewell, then. We will speak again soon when your great task reaches fulfillment. You have my gratitude. Then Lady Porcupine was alone again with the wind and her thoughts, her strange, bitter thoughts, in the garden of the house called Weeping. The longer, heavier sword skimmed off Barrack's falchion and crashed down against the small buckler on his left arm. A lightning flash of pain leaped through his shoulder. He cried out, sagged to one knee, and only just managed to throw his blade up in time to deflect the second blow. He climbed to his feet and stood, gasping for breath. The air was full of sawdust. He could barely hold even his own slender sword upright. Stop! He stepped back, letting the falchion sag. But instead of lowering his own longer sword, Shazo suddenly lunged forward, the point of his blade jabbing down at Barrack's ankles. Caught by surprise, the prince hesitated for an instant before jumping to avoid the thrust. It was a mistake. As the prince landed awkwardly, the old man had already turned his sword around, so he clutched the blade in his gauntlets. He thumped Barrack hard in the chest with the sword's pommel, forcing out the rest of the boy's air. Gasping, Barrack took one step backward and collapsed. For a moment, black clouds closed in. When he could see again, Shazo was standing over him. "Curse you!" Barrack wheezed. He kicked out at Shazo's leg, but the old man stepped neatly away. "Didn't you hear? I said stop." "Because your arm was tired? Because you did not sleep well last night? Is that what you will do in battle? Cry mercy because you fight only with one hand and it has wearied?" Shazo made a noise of disgust and turned his back on the young prince. It was all Barrack could do not to scramble to his feet at this display of contempt and scull the old Tuani with the padded falchion. But it was not just his remaining shreds of civility and honor that stopped him, nor his exhaustion. Even in his rage, Barrack doubted he would actually land the blow. He got up slowly instead and pulled off the buckler and gauntlets so he could rub his arm. Although his left hand was curled into something like a bird's claw, and his forearm was thin as a child's, after countless painful hours lifting the iron-headed weights called poises, Barrack had strengthened the sinews of his upper arm and shoulder enough that he could use the buckler effectively. But, and he hated to admit it, and certainly would not do so aloud, Shazo was right. He still was not strong enough, not even in the good arm, which had to wield his only blade, since even a dagger was too much for his crippled fingers. As he pulled on the loose deerskin glove he wore to hide his twisted hand, Barrack was still furious. "Does it make you feel strong, beating a man who can only fight one-armed?" The armorers, who today had the comparatively quiet task of cutting new leather straps at the huge bench along the room's south wall, looked up, but only for a moment. They were used to such things. Barrack had no doubt they all thought him a spoiled child. He flushed and slammed down his gauntlets. Shazo, who was unstitching his padded practice vest, curled his lip. "By the 100 tits of the great mother, boy, I am not beating you. I am teaching you." They had been out of balance all day. Even as a way to spend the tedious, stretching hours until his brother convened the council, this had been a mistake. Bryony might have made it something civil, even enjoyable, but Bryony was not there. Beric lowered himself to the ground and began removing his leg pads. He stared at Shazo's back, irritated by the old man's graceful, unhurried movements. Who was he to be so calm when everything was falling apart? Beric wanted to sting the Master of Arms somehow. Why did he call you teacher? Shazo's fingers slowed, but he did not turn. What? You know, the envy, the envoy from Hyrosol, that man Dawet. Why did he call you teacher? And he called you something else, Morja. What does that mean? Shazo shrugged off the vest. His linen undershirt was soaked with sweat so that every muscle on his broad brown back was apparent. Beric had seen this so many times, and even in the midst of anger he felt something like love for the old Tuani, a love for the known and familiar, however unsatisfying. What if Bryony really leaves? He thought suddenly. What if Kendrick really sends her to Hyrosol to marry Ludus? I will never see her again. His outrage that a bandit should demand his sister in marriage, and that his brother should even consider it, suddenly chilled into a simpler and far more devastating thought. Southmarch Castle, empty of Bryony. I have been asked to answer that for the council, Shazo said slowly. You will hear what I say there, Prince Beric. I do not want to speak of it twice. He dropped the vest to the floor and walked away from it. Beric could not help staring. Shazo was usually not only meticulous in the care of his weapons and equipment, but sharp-tongued to any who were not. Beric most definitely included. The Master of Arms set the long sword in the rack without oiling it or even taking off the padding, took his shirt from a hook, and walked out of the armory without another word. Beric sat as short of breath as if Shazo had struck him again in the stomach. He had long felt that among all the heedless folk in Southmarch, he was the only one who understood how truly bad things had become, who saw the deceptions and cruelties others missed or deliberately ignored, who sensed the growing danger to his family and their kingdom. Now that proof was blossoming before him, he wished he could make it all go away, that he could turn and run headlong back into his own childhood. After supper, Chert's belly was full, but his head was still unsettled. Opal was fussing happily over Flint, measuring the boy with a knotted string while he squirmed. She had used the few copper chips she had put aside for a new cooking pot to buy some cloth, since she planned to make a shirt for the child. Don't look at me that way, she told her husband. I wasn't the one who took him out and let him rip and dirty this one so badly. Chert shook his head. It was not paying for the boy's new shirt that concerned him. The bell for the front door rang, a couple of short tugs on the cord. Opal handed the boy her measuring string and went to answer it. Chert heard her say, Oh my, come in, please. Her eyebrows were up when she returned, trailed by Cinnabar, a handsome, big-boned Funderling, the leader of the important Quicksilver family. Chert rose. Magister, you do me an honor. Will you sit down? Cinnabar nodded, grunting as he seated himself. Although he was younger than Chert by some dozen years, his muscle bulk was already turning to fat. His mind was still lean, though. Chert respected the man's wits. Can we offer you something, Magister? Opal asked. Beer? Some blue root tea? She was both excited and worried, trying to catch her husband's eye, but he would not be distracted. Tea will do me well, mistress, thank you. Flint had gone stock still on the floor beside Opal's stool, watching the newcomer like a cat spying an unfamiliar dog. Chert knew he should wait until the tea was served, but his curiosity was strong. Your family is well? Cinnabar snorted. Greedy as blind shrews, but that's nothing new. It strikes me you've had an addition yourself. His name is Flint. Chirp felt sure this was the point of the visit. He's one of the big folk. Yes, I can see that. And of course I've heard much about him already. It's all over town. Is there a problem that he stays with us? He has no memory of his real name or parents. Opal bustled into the room with a tray, the best teapot, and 3 cups. Her smile was a little too bright as she poured for the Magister first. Chirk could see that she was frightened. Fissure and fracture, he thought. Is she so attached to the boy already? Cinnabar blew on the cup nestled in his big hands. As long as he breaks none of the laws of Funderling Town, you could guess the badger for all it matters to me. He turned his keen eyes on Opal. But people do talk, and they are slow to welcome change. Still, I suppose it is too late to reveal this secret more delicately. It is no secret, said Opal a little sharply. Obviously, Cinnabar sighed. It is your affair. That's not why I'm here tonight. Now Chirk was puzzled. He watched Cinnabar snuffle at his tea. The man was not only head of his own family, but was one of the most powerful men in the guild of stonecutters. Chirk could only be patient. That is good, mistress, Cinnabar said at last. My own lady, she will boil the same roots over and over until it is like drinking rainwater. He looked from her expectant, worried face to Chirk's and smiled. It cracked his broad, heavy-jawed face into little wrinkles, like a hammer blow on slate. Ah, I am tormenting you, but do not mean to. There's nothing ill in this visit, that's a promise. I need your help, Chirk. You do? Aye. You know we're cutting in the bedrock of the inner keep. Tricky work. The king's family wants to expand the burial vaults and stitch together various of their buildings with tunnels. I've heard, of course, that's old Hornblende in charge, isn't it? He's a good man. Was in charge. He's quit. Says it's because of his back, but I have my doubts, though he is of an age. Cinnabar nodded slowly. That's why I need your help, Chert. He shook his head, confused. What? I want you to chief the job. It's a careful matter, as you know, digging under the castle. I don't need to say more, do I? I hear the men are skittish, which may have something to do with Hornblende's wanting nothing more of it. Chert was stunned. At least a dozen other Funderlings had the experience to take Hornblende's place, all more senior or more important than he was, including one of his own brothers. Why me? Because you have sense. Because I need someone I can trust as chief over this task. You worked with the big folk before and made out well. He flicked a glance at Opal, who had finished her tea, and was again measuring the child, although Chert knew she was listening to every word. We can speak more of it later, if you tell me you will do it. How could he say no? Of course, Magister, it's an honor. Good, very good. Cinnabar rose, not without a small noise of effort. Here, give me your hand on it. Come to me tomorrow, and I'll give you the plans and your list of men. Oh, and thanking you for your hospitality, Mistress Opal. Her smile was genuine now. Our pleasure, Magister. He did not leave, but took a step forward and stood over Flint. What do you say, boy? He asked, mock stern. Do you like stone? The child regarded him carefully. Which kind? Cinnabar laughed. Well questioned. Ah, Master Chert, perhaps he has the making of a Funderling at that, if he grows not too big for the tunnels. He was still chuckling as Chert let him out. Such wonderful news! Opal's eyes were shining. Your family will regret their snubs now. Perhaps. Chert was glad, of course, but he knew old Hornblende for a level-headed fellow. Was there a reason he had given up such a prestigious post? Could there be something of a poisoned offering about it? Chert was not used to kindnesses from the town leaders, although he had no reason to mistrust Cinnabar, who was reputed for fair dealing. Little Flint has brought us luck. Good luck, Opal purred. He will have a shirt, and I will have that winter shawl. And you, my husband, you must have a handsome new pair of boots. You cannot go walking through the big folks' castle in those miserable old things. Let's not spend the silver we haven't seen yet, he said, but mildly. He might have been a little uncertain about this surprising good fortune, but it was good to see Opal happy. And you would have left the boy there, she said, almost giddy. Left our luck sitting on the grass. Luck's a strange thing, Chert reminded her. And, as they say, there's much digging before the entire vein is uncovered. He sat down to finish his tea. Kendrick had convened the council in the castle's chapel of Erebor, dedicated to the sea god who had always been the Eden family's special protector. The main chamber was dominated by the statue of the god in green soapstone, trimmed with bright metal, with golden kelp coiling in Erevor's hair and beard, and his great golden spear held high to calm the waters, so Anglin's ancestors could cross the sea from Conor. Generations of the Eden family had been named and married at the low stone altar beneath the statue, and many had lain there in state, too, after they had died. The echoes that drifted back from the chapel's high tiled ceiling sometimes seemed to be voices from other times. Beric had enough difficulty with unwanted voices as it was. He didn't like the chapel much. Today, a ring of chairs had been set up on the floor just beneath the steps that led to the low stone altar. It is the only chamber in the castle where we can close the door and find any privacy, Kendrick explained to the nobles. Anything important said in the throne room or the oak chamber will be spread across Southmarch before the speaker is finished. Beric moved uncomfortably in the hard, high-backed chair. He had been chewing willow bark since supper, but his crippled arm still ached miserably from Shazot's blows. He darted a sour look at the Master of Arms. Shazot's face was a mask, his eyes fixed on the frescoes that, with so many lamps lit, gleamed daytime bright, as though the birth and triumph of Erebor was the most interesting thing he had ever seen. Beric had not attended many of these councils. He and Bryony had only been invited since their father's departure, and this was his first without her, which added to his discomfort. He could not shake off the feeling that a part of him was gone, as though he had woken up to find he had only one leg. Galen of Summerfield was talking quietly into the Prince Regent's left ear. Sizel, hierarch of Southmarch, had been given the position of honor on Kendrick's other hand. The hierarch, a slender, active man of 60 winters or so, was the leading priest of the marchlands, and although in some things he was forced to act as the hand of the Trigonarch in distant Cyan, he was also the first northerner to hold the position, and thus unusually loyal to the Edens. The Trigonarchy had been unhappy that Beric's father Olin had chosen to elevate one of the local priests over their own candidate, but neither Cyan nor the Trigon itself wielded as much power in the north as they once had. Ranged around the table were many of the other leading nobles of the realm: Blueshore's Tyne, Lord Ninor, the Castellan, the bear-like Lord Constable Avon Brone, and Beric's dandified cousin Rorik Longarn, who was the Earl of Daler's Trough, strangely matched with those dour, plain-spoken folk, Beric always felt, as well as half a dozen more nobles, some clearly sleepy after the midday meal, others indifferently hiding their irritation at giving up a day of hunting or hawking. That sort would not even have been present were it not for their interest in seeing some relief from the royal levy, Beric felt sure. The fact that his sister was the bargaining chip bothered them not at all. He would gladly have seen them all skewered on Erevor's golden fish spear. Shazo alone seemed suitably grave. He had taken a place at the table's far end, with a space between himself and the nearest nobles on either side. Beric thought he looked a bit like a prisoner brought to judgment. "Your argument should be made to all," Kendrick loudly told Galen, who was still whispering to him. At this signal, the other nobles turned their attention to the head of the table. Duke Galen paused. A bit of a flush crept up his neck and onto his handsome face. Other than Beric and the Prince Regent, he was the youngest man at the gathering. "I simply said that I think we should be making a mistake to so easily give the princess to Ludus Drakova," he began. "We all want nothing more than to have our King Olin back. But even if Ludus honors the bargain and delivers him without treachery, what then? Olin, may the gods long preserve him, will grow old one day and die. Much can happen before that day, and only the unsleeping fates know all. But one thing is certain. When our liege is gone, Ludus and his heirs will have a perpetual claim on the throne of the March Kings. And his claim will be better than yours," Beric thought, "which is your real objection." Still, he was heartened to discover he had an ally, even one he cared for as little as Galen Tully. He supposed he should be grateful for that Galen was the oldest of the Tully sons. He might be an ambitious prig, but he looked noble as Silas when set beside his brothers, shiftless Caradon and mad Hendon. "Easy enough for you to say, Summerfield," growled Tyne Aldrich, "with all your share of the ransom gathered already. What of the rest of us? We should be fools not to take up Ludus's bargain." "Fools?" Beric straightened. "We are fools if we don't sell my sister." "Enough," Kendrick said heavily. "We will come back to this question later. First, there are more pressing matters. Can Ludus and his envoy even be trusted? Obviously, if we were to agree to this offering, and I speak only of possibilities, Beric, so please keep still, we could not allow my sister to leave our protection until the king was released and safe." Beric squirmed, almost breathless with fury. He would never have believed that Kendrick could talk so carelessly about giving his own sister to a bandit. But the Prince Regent had spoken with another purpose. "In fact," Kendrick continued, "we know little about Ludus, except by reputation, and less of his envoy. Shazo, perhaps you can make us wiser about this man Dawit Dan Far, since you seem to know him." His question settled on the Master of Arms as softly as a silken noose. Shazo stirred. "Yes," he said heavily, "I know him. We are related." This set the table muttering. "Then you should not be seated in this council, sir," said Earl Rorick loudly. The royal cousin was dressed in the very latest fashion, the slashes in his deep purple doublet a blazing yellow. He turned to the Prince Regent, bright and self-assured as a courting bird. "This is shameful. How many councils have we held, speaking, though we knew it not, for the benefit not only of the marchlands, but Hyrosol as well?" At last Shazo seemed to pay attention. Like an old lion woken from sleep, he blinked and leaned forward. One hand had fallen to his side, close to the hilt of his dagger. "Stay. Are you calling me a traitor, my lord?" Rorick's return look was haughty, but the Earl's cheeks had gone pale. "You never told us you were this man's relative." "Why should I?" Shazo stared at him for a moment, then sagged back, his energy spent. He was of no importance to any of you before he arrived here. I myself did not know he had taken service with Ludus until the day he arrived. Last I had heard of him, he led his own free company, robbing and burning across Crace and the south. What else do you know of him? Kendrick asked, not particularly kindly. He called you a name, Mordia. It means uncle, or sometimes father-in-law. He was mocking me. Shazo closed his eyes for a moment. Dawet is the fourth son of the old king of Tuan. When he was young, I taught him and his brothers just as I have taught the children of this family. He was in many ways the best of them, but in more ways the worst. Swift and strong and clever, but with the heart of a desert jackal, looking only for what would advantage himself. When I was captured by your father in the battle for Hyrasol, I thought I would never see him or any of the rest of my family again. So how does this Dawet come to be serving Ludus Drakava? I do not know, as I said, King Highness. I heard that Dawet had been exiled from Tuan because of a crime he had committed. Shazo's face had gone hard and blank. His bad ways had continued and worsened, and at last he despoiled a young woman of good family, and even his father would no longer protect him. Exiled, he crossed the ocean from Zand to Ion, then joined a mercenary company and rose to lead it. He did not fight for his father or Tuan when our country was conquered by the Autark, nor did I, for that matter, since I had already been brought here. A complicated story, said Hierarch Sizel. Your pardon, but you ask us to take much on faith, Lord Shazo. How is it that you heard of his doings after your exile here? Shazo looked at him but said nothing. See, Rorik proclaimed, he hides something. These are foul times, Kendrick said, that we should all be so mistrustful. But the Hierarch's question is a fair one. How do you come to know of what happened to him after you left Tuan? Shazo's expression became even more lifeless. 10 years ago, I had a letter from my wife, the gods rest her. It was the last she sent me before she died. And she used this letter to tell you about one of what must have been many students? The master of arms placed his dark hands flat on his knees, then looked down at them carefully, as though he had never seen such unusual things as hands before. The girl he ruined was my youngest daughter. Afterward, in her grief, she went to the temple and became a priestess of the Great Mother. When she sickened and died 2 years later, my wife wrote to tell me. My wife thought that it was a shattered heart that had taken Haneda, that our daughter had died from shame, not just fever. She also told me something of Dawet, full of despair that such a man should live and prosper when our daughter was dead. Silence reigned for long moments in the small chapel. I am grieved to hear it, Shazo, Kendrick said at last, and doubly grieved that I have forced you to think of it again. I have thought of nothing else since I first heard the name of Hyrasol's envoy, the old man said. Varric had seen Shazo do this before, go away to somewhere deep inside himself, like the master of a besieged castle. Were Dawet Danfar not under the March King's seal, one of the two of us would already be dead. Kendrick had clearly been caught by surprise, and just as clearly had not enjoyed it. This speaks badly of the envoy, of course. Does it also mean his offer is not to be trusted? Hierarch Sizel cleared his throat. I, for one, think the offer is honest, although the messenger be not. Like many bandit lords, Ludus Dracovai is desperate to make himself a true monarch. Already he has petitioned the Trigon to recognize him as Hyrosol's king. It would be to his advantage to link himself to one of the existing noble houses as well. Cyan and Gelon will not do it. Even with the mountains between them, Hyrosol is still too close to them, and they deem Ludus too ambitious. Thus, I suspect his mind has turned to Southmarch. He frowned, considering. It could even be he planned this all along, and is the reason he took King Olin. He wanted the ransom to begin to pinch before he offered this other bargain? Asked a baron from Maronswalk, shaking his head. Very crafty. All this talk of why and what happened does not change the facts, snapped Earl Tyne. He has the king. We do not. He wants the king's daughter. Do we give her to him? Do you agree with the hierarch, Shazo? Kendrick looked at the Master of Arms keenly. He had never felt Bryony's loyalty to the old Tuani, but he did not share Barrick's grudges either. Is the offer to be trusted? I think it genuine. Yes, Shazo said at last. But the Earl of Blueshore has reminded us of the true question here. And what do you think? Kendrick prodded him. It is not for me to say. The old man's eyes were hooded. She is not my sister. The king is not my father. The final decision will be mine, of course. But I wish to hear counsel first, and you were always one of my father's most trusted counselors. Barrett could not help but notice that Kendrick had called Shazo his father's trusted counselor, not his own. The Master of Arms grew even more stony at this slight, but he spoke carefully. I think it a bad idea. Again, one who does not suffer has an easy choice, said Tyne Aldrich. You have no ransom to raise, no tithe of crops to deliver. What does it matter to you whether the rest of us are crippled by this? Shazo would not answer, but Galen Tolly did. Can none of you see any farther than the boundaries of your own small holdings? He demanded. Do you think you alone suffer hardship? If we do not give the princess to Ludus, as I think we should not, we all must still share the burden of the greatest hardship, the king's absence. What did our father say? Barrick asked suddenly. The whole gathering had been like a bad dream, a confusion of voices and faces. He still could not believe his brother was giving the Lord Protector's suit any consideration at all. You read his letter, Kendrick. He must have said something about this. His brother nodded, but did not meet his younger brother's eye. Yes, but in few words, as though he did not take it seriously. He called it a foolish offer. Kendrick blinked, suddenly weary. Does this help us to decide, Barrick? You know that father would never allow himself to be bartered for anyone, even the lowest pig farmer. He has always put his ideals above all else. There was a note of bitterness now. And you know he dotes on Bryony, and has since she was in swaddling clothes. You've complained of it often enough, Barrick. But he's right. She is our sister. And we Edens are the rulers of Southmarch. Even father has always put those responsibilities above his own desires. Who do you think is more important to our people, our father or sister? The people love Bryony. Yes, they do. Her absence would sadden them, but it would not make them fearful, as they have been since the king has been gone. A kingdom without its monarch is like a man without a heart. Better father were dead, the gods preserve him and us, than simply gone. A shocked silence fell over the table at this near treason, but Beric knew his brother was right. Although everyone had tried to pretend otherwise, the king's absence had been a kind of living death for the March kingdoms, as unnatural as a year without sunshine. And now, for the first time, Beric could see the strain beneath what he sometimes thought of as his brother's guileless features, the immense worry and exhaustion. Beric could only wonder what other things Kendrick had been hiding from him. The other nobles took up the argument. It quickly became apparent that Shazo and Galen were in the minority, that Tyne and Rorik and even Lord Constable Avon Brone thought that since one day Bryony would be married off for political gain anyway, her maidenhead might as well be bartered now for something as valuable as restoring King Olin. However, few beside Tyne were honest enough to admit that part of the plan's appeal was that it would spare them many gold dolphins as well. Tempers frayed, and the discussion became loud. At one point, Avon Brone threatened to knock in Ivar of Silverside's head, although both were arguing in favor of the same position. At last, Kendrick demanded quiet. "It is late, and I have not made up my mind yet," the Prince Regent said. "I must think and then sleep on it tonight. My brother Beric is right in one thing especially. This is my sister, and I'll do nothing lightly that will so greatly affect her. Tomorrow I will announce my decision." He stood. The others rose and bade him good night, although ill will was still in the air. Beric was dissatisfied with many things, but he did not for a moment envy his older brother, who, like a cattle herder's dog, had to nip at the heels of these vexatious bulls to keep them moving together. "I want to talk to you," he told Kendrick as his brother left the chapel. The Prince Regent's guards had already formed a silent wall behind him. "Not tonight, Beric. I know what you think. I still have much to do before I sleep." But Kendrick, she's our sister. She is terrified. I went to her chambers and heard her sobbing." "Enough!" the Prince Regent all but shouted. "By Perrin's hammer, can't you leave me alone? Unless you have some magical solution to this problem, all I want from you tonight is silence." Despite his fury, Kendrick seemed on the verge of weeping himself. He waved his hand. "No more." Stunned, Beric could only stand and watch his older brother walk back toward his chambers. When Kendrick stumbled, one of the guards kindly reached out a hand to steady him. "That's enough, Bryony. I cannot tell you more. Not yet. I still must think and talk on this entire matter. You are my sister, and I love you. But I must be the ruler here while our father is gone. Go to bed." Remembering Kendrick's words of only a few hours earlier, thinking back on the whole terrible day, she lay sleepless in the dark. Although judging by the sounds, her ladies were not having the same problem. As always, pretty little Rose was snoring like an old dog. Bryony had managed to drowse for a short while, but a terrible dream had awoken her, in which Ludus Dracova, who in truth she had never seen, all she knew about him was that he was near her father's age, had been an ancient thing of cobwebs, dust, and bones, pursuing her through a trackless gray forest. She had not been able to sleep since. She wondered if it was dreams of that sort which robbed Beric of his sleep and health. "What hour is it?" she wondered. She had not heard the temple's midnight bell yet, but surely it could not be far away. I must be the only one in the castle still awake. In other times, such a thought would have been more exciting than troubling, but now it was only testament to the terrible fate hanging over her like a headsman's axe. Has Kendrick decided? He had given away nothing of his thoughts when she had visited him in his chambers during the evening. She had wept, which made her angry with herself now. She had also begged him not to marry her to Ludus, then had apologized for her selfishness. But he must know I want father back as much as anyone does. Kendrick had been distant the whole time she was in his chamber, but had taken her hand when they parted and kissed her cheek, something he rarely did. In fact, the memory of that kiss now chilled her more than his preoccupation. She felt certain that he had been kissing her goodbye. Pain was wearying. Perpetual fear became numbness. For a little while, Bryony's mind wandered, and she imagined all the things, good and bad, that could happen. Somehow her father could escape, and Ludus would have no claim on the Edmonds. Or she could find that the Lord Protector was a slandered man, that truly he was handsome and kind. Or that he was worse than the tales, in which case she would have no choice but to kill him in his sleep, then kill herself. She lived so many lives in that hour, both grim and fanciful, that at last she slipped into a true dream without knowing it. A kinder one this time, the twins playing at hide and seek with Kendrick, children together once more, and slept through the midnight bell. But she did not sleep through the shriek that came just a short while later. Bryony sat upright in bed, half certain she had imagined it. Nearby, young Rose squirmed in her sleep, lost in some nightmare of her own. "The black man," the girl moaned. Bryony heard it again, a terrified wail, growing louder. Moina was awake now, too. Something banged hard on the chamber door, and Bryony almost fell out of her bed in fright. "The Autarch!" Moina squealed, plucking at the charm she wore about her neck. "Come to kill us all in our beds!" "It is only one of the guards," Bryony told the Helming-Sea girl harshly, trying to convince herself as well. "Go and take off the bolt." "No, princess, they'll ravish us." Bryony pulled her dagger from beneath her mattress, then wrapped the blanket around her and stumbled to the door, heart fluttering as she called out to learn who was on the other side. The voice was not one of the guards, but even more familiar. As the door opened, Bryony's great-aunt Marilana flapped into the room, her nightdress askew, her long gray hair down on her shoulders, crying, "Gods preserve us! Gods preserve us!" "Why is everyone shouting?" Bryony asked, fighting against growing dread. "Is it a fire?" Marilana stumbled to a halt, panting and peering short-sightedly. Her cheeks were wet with tears. "Bryony, is that you? Is it? Oh, praise the gods! I thought they'd taken you all." The old woman's words ran through her like icy water. "All? What are you talking about?" "Your brother! Your poor brother!" The chill threatened to stop her heart. She cried, "Beric!" and shoved past Marilana. There were no guards outside, but the passage was full of disembodied sounds, wails and distant shouting, and as she emerged into the high-ceilinged tribute hall, she found it full of people drifting confusedly in the near darkness, calling questions or babbling religious oaths, a few carrying candles or lamps, and all in their night-clothes. The vast hall, strange even in bright daylight, with its weird statues and other objects brought back from foreign lands, like the stuffed head of the great toothed Oliphant that hung above the fireplace, and was ugly as any demon in the Book of Trigon, now also seemed filled with pale ghosts. Stefan's Ninor, wearing a ridiculous sleeping cap, and with his beard tied up in a strange little bag, stood in the center of the room, shouting orders, but no one was listening to him. The scene was all the more dreamlike because no one stopped Bryony or even spoke to her as she ran past them. Everyone seemed to be going in the wrong direction. She reached the hall outside Beric's chamber, but found it deserted, her brother's door closed. She had only a moment to wonder at this before something grabbed her arm. She let out a small, choked shriek, but when she saw whose wide-eyed face was beside her, she grabbed at him and pulled him close. Oh, oh, I thought you... Marilana said... Barrick's red hair was disheveled from bed, wild as a gale-blown haystack. I saw you go past. He seemed like one dragged from sleep, yet still dreaming, his eyes wide but curiously empty. Come. No, perhaps shouldn't. What? Her relief vanished as swiftly as it came. Barrick, what in the name of all the gods is going on? He led her around the corner into the main hall of the residence. The corridor was full, and guards armed with halberds were pushing servants and others back from the door of Kendrick's chambers. She suddenly realized her misunderstanding. Merciful Zoria, she whispered. Now she could see in the light of the torches that Barrick's face was not empty, but slack with horror, his lips trembling. He took her hand and pulled her through the crowd, which shrank back from them as though the twins might carry some plague. Several of the women were weeping, faces grotesque as festival masks. The guards kneeling around the body glanced up at the twins' approach, but for a moment did not seem to recognize them. Then Ferris Vanson, the captain of the Royal Guard, stood, his face full of dreadful pity, and yanked one of the crouching soldiers out of the way. The Prince Regent's room was full of terrible smells, slaughterhouse smells. They had turned Kendrick onto his back. His face gleamed red in the torchlight. There was so much blood that for a fleeting instant, Bryony could tell herself it was someone else, that this horror had been visited on some stranger. But Barrick's groan destroyed the flimsy hope. Her dagger fell from her hand and clinked onto the flags. Her knees sagged and she half fell, then crawled toward her older brother like a blind animal, tangling herself for a moment with one of the guards as he mumbled a prayer. Kendrick's face twitched. One blood-slicked hand opened and closed. He's alive! Bryony screamed. Where is Chavin? Has someone sent for him? She tried to lift Kendrick, but he was too wet, too heavy. Barrick pulled her back and she struck at her twin. Let me go! He's alive! He can't be. Barrick, too, was in some other world, his voice confused and distant. Just look at him. Kendrick's mouth worked again, and Bryony almost climbed on top of him. So desperate was she to hear him speak, to know that he was still her brother, that life was in him. She searched for his wounds so she could stop them up, but the whole front of him was soaking wet, his shirt in tatters and the skin beneath it just as ragged. Don't, she said in his ear. Hold on to me. Her brother's eyes rolled. He was trying to find her. His mouth opened. Hiss. A sibilant whisper that only Bryony could hear. Don't leave us. Oh, dear Kendrick, don't. She kissed his bloody cheek. He let out a whimper of pain and curled as slowly as a leaf on hot coals until he was lying on his side, bent double. He kicked, whimpered again. Then the life was out of him. Barrick still pulled at her, but he was weeping too. Everyone is crying, Bryony thought. The whole world is crying. Dimly, as though it were happening in another country, she could hear people shouting down the corridor. The prince is dead! The prince has been murdered! Guard Captain Vanson was trying to lift her away from Kendrick. She turned and slapped at him, then grabbed at the man's heavy tunic and tried to pull him down, so full of fury she could barely think. How did this happen? She shrieked, her thoughts as red and slippery as her hands. Where were you? Where were his guards? You were all traitors, murderers. For a moment, Vanson held her at arm's length. Then his face convulsed with grief, and he released his grip. Bryony scrambled to her feet, struck hard at his shoulders and face. Ferris Vanson did nothing more to defend himself than lower his head until Barrick pulled her off. Look, her brother said, pointing. Look there. Bryony. Her eyes blurred with tears. She did not at first understand what she was seeing. Two stained lumps of shadow on the floor beside the Prince Regent's bed. Then she saw the Eden wolf on the slashed tunic of one of the figures, and the pool of blood a shiny blackness beneath them both, and understood that Kendrick's guards, too, were dead. And that's where we're going to finish in a few minutes past 3, but I wanted to finish the chapter. So that's the end of chapter 6. Anyway, and I am going to pack it in for the night. So lovely to have you all back, or to be back with you all, or to back you with all having you all back with. You figured out. I gave you all the words. You put them in any order you want to. Meanwhile, I am going to get out of Dodge. I hope you will all take good care of yourselves as we move forward, trying to get out of this pandemic, get back into something like normal life, where we still have lots of things we've got to work on and problems we have to solve. But at least we will be able to do it while going outside occasionally and seeing friends and family. So fingers crossed. We'll all hang in there, hope for better luck for the people in the parts of the world where they're having especially bad times right now. You take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones and friends, take care of everybody. I will do my best to take care of what I have to take care of. And I will see you, well, some of you I will see tonight at 7 p.m. and we will start chapter 7. The rest of you I will see next week at this same TAD time on this same TAD channel. And again, I thank you, and I say good night.